Huh? I'm just going to mute everybody so that there isn't any disturbance on Facebook. If you have any questions, 2 hands means you can't hear what I'm saying, okay? 1 hand means you have a question. Let me just go to participants here. Mute all. You actually can unmute yourself if you want. So I'm giving you that option. Okay, my friends. We are going to continue our study of Tanya at 37. And this is a really remarkable, phenomenal stuff, because we're talking about the essence of a mitzvah, the power of a mitzvah, the profundity of a mitzvah. A mitzvah, as really it was never understood before. The Alter Rebbe shines such a remarkable light on mitzvahs and Yiddishkeit that it's simply exhilarating. Let's just try to synopsize before we go on to today's specific focus. The chapter is about mitzvah impact, the impact that a mitzvah has, and mitzvahs have a tremendous impact, as we're going to find out. And we talked about material, which is malleable or can be modified. And today the focus will be on the material which is non-modifiable, things which can't be elevated and can't be transformed. Now, of course, to appreciate that, I need to briefly recap and remind everybody that as we talked in the previous chapter of Tanya about the idea of Matan Torah, and we talked about how things will be when Mashiach will come. You can't hear, eh? Bye-bye. Okay. So you guys are going to Facebook, and then I guess I'll see you back on Zoom after with your questions. All right? We will continue to try to fix this problem. Okay, that's the end of Zoom for tonight. I'm all with you guys. It's all Facebook Live now. So the Alter Rebbe tells us in this chapter of Tanya that when we perform a mitzvah, we don't necessarily do something to earn Hashem's favor so that He will allow us the privilege of seeing a perfected world and the coming of Mashiach. But rather, when we do a mitzvah, we are creating that future reality. We are actually modifying the material reality so that it now can become see-through. And when it becomes see-through, the presence of the Creator becomes obvious. And you may well ask, you don't see that. You don't feel it. Don't feel bad, neither do I. Very few human beings can feel and know the impact of a mitzvah. That's for the greatest of tzaddikim. But we will someday, hopefully very soon, all know the impact of our mitzvah. And we'll know that the future reality and the clarity with which we will see the presence of Hashem, the material obfuscation that will dissipate, and the incredible awareness that will shine through will be the direct result of the mitzvahs that we performed. Imagine, if you will, that the world now is encased in a haze, in a fog, and we're actually diminishing that fog. We're scraping the frosting off the glass, for lack of a better metaphor. So Mashiach's coming is not simply a reward, and for that matter, when neshamas go to the place called Gan Eden, it is also the result of their mitzvahs, but that's the result that's generated in the heavens. But here we speak about the result that's generated on earth. Very big difference. Huge difference, a world of difference. Because the neshamas that have been in Gan Eden, delighting in their efforts, in their toil, in their commitment, in their love, and their devotion, which was expended during the course of the terrestrial lifetime, now they're able to enjoy the fruits of those labors. And every time you do a mitzvah, you create an angel per se. Or you build a reality, a heavenly reality. But the mitzvah also makes an impact here on earth. And the neshamas on high don't get to see this until they return. And when they return, with Tchias HaMesim, and when the era and time of Mashiach climaxes in its fullest maturation, we and they will be able to appreciate the incredible impact our mitzvahs had. And that's why it's really a sacred duty for all of us to do mitzvahs. Not because we have to run the obstacle course and then get the prize, but because going through the gamut of life necessarily transforms this world and actualizes a Mashiach reality. And because of this, it's a sacred duty. It's a holy mission that each of us have been given, letaken olam, to fix, to rectify, to perfect a broken world. It's a sacred duty and mission that you and I have been given to be able to correct all of the broken parts of reality which refuse to allow the light to shine through. And by rarefying materiality through the performance of mitzvahs, this is achieved. And of course, this should give us a tremendous shot in the arm. Give us a real inspiration for doing our mitzvahs and doing them well, and at the same time avoiding sin at any cost. Because every time you do an Aveira, every time you violate the will of Hashem, not only are you misbehaving, but you're making the world a darker place. And you're distancing, chas v'shalom, delaying the process of redemption. So this is the way we look at a mitzvah, and this is the way we look at the ultimate destination, the end goal. You could argue that, unlike the common misnomer, most people see the idea of schar v'onish, the idea of punishment and reward, as something which isn't the result of a mitzvah, but is given to you because you did the mitzvah. It's not really the mitzvah itself, it's like a condition. If you'll do X, Y, and Z, you'll get A, B, and Z. But X, Y, and Z doesn't create A, B, and C. Like, for example, the person who's a sharecropper and he gets a salary. So he gets an automatic deposit in his bank. But that doesn't grow from the ground. It's because he tilled the soil. It's because he ensured that things were planted and weeded and that there's a harvest that the owner of the field is appreciative and he keeps his end of the deal. He makes him a direct deposit. But he isn't eating the actual fruits of his labor. That's a paycheck that's coming as a result because of what you did. But it isn't created by it. Here, very much different than the way people typically think of the notion of punishment or reward, or God doesn't remain in debt and he'll pay you back, and if you did something nice, he'll do something nice for you. Very, very differently. This is not about if you do good things, God gives you good prizes and nice things, and if you do bad things, and God will strike at you and do bad things to you. This is not about the carrot and the stick. Instead, what Hashem really is telling us is that our lives make a world of difference. That He's relying on us. That He's given us the ability, He pleads with us. Make that world, make that perfect garden happen. And it's in our hands. It's our mitzvahs. Our mitzvahs that accelerate the arrival of Mashiach. Well, chas v'shalom, our averos push off and delay and slow, Rachmana litzlan, the coming of Mashiach. Now, having said all of this, in last week's class, we talked about the three different elements of Chai, the animal world, Tzomeach, the vegetative world, and then we talked about Domem, the inanimate world. And the examples that were given were the notion that a person is able to, if you will, utilize the animal hide and create holiness out of it. Mezuzah, Sefer Torah, pair of tefillin are easy examples that come to mind. And that's the meaning of when the Torah says that it's not appropriate. The word kosher doesn't mean blessed. It means suitable. It's not suitable if it's not mutarim, if it's not permissible for you to eat. And of course you may ask the question, I'm not eating the tefillin. Why did the tefillin have to come from a kosher source? Nobody's going to chomp on a Sefer Torah. Who cares if a Sefer Torah comes from a horse? Why is the horse any worse than the cow? You ride the horse, you work the field with the cow. Different animals. They have their own aptitude, if you will. So I understand God says kosher food is kosher food. Okay. But He didn't say you have to ride kosher animals. So if I can ride a horse, why can't a Sefer Torah be made out of a horse? What is the connection to kosher? Kosher is about eating. And on the surface, if you stop and think about it, it does seem rather strange. But the way the Alter Rebbe explains it everything makes perfect sense. The notion of ingesting food is that you will elevate that food when you follow the eating, the consumption, with good deeds. And that's the way we look, incidentally, at the consumption of meat. We don't look at it as a cruel thing. We don't look at it as a horrible thing. We look at it as a sacred thing. The cow eats the grass. The grass soaked up the nutrients and the hydration. But who served God? Not the water nor the soil. Not the grass, nor the wheat, nor the oats, nor the clover, nor did the cow. But when you served Hashem, and you served Hashem because you had dinner, now the cow is serving Hashem. Now the clover is serving Hashem. Now the minerals and hydration are serving Hashem. This is the way we see humanity. Tragically, when a person behaves in a sinful fashion, so he has dinner, and then he uses the energy to strike somebody, to harm somebody, to slander somebody, to do something which is a direct violation of the will of Hashem, then not only does he bring about a denigration within in himself, but instead he also denigrates the animal, he denigrates the vegetation, and ultimately denigrates the essence, the soil and the water as well. And that's the responsibility Hashem gives us. So we talked about the world of Chai directly, even though the animal eats the clover or the hay. We talked about specifically the idea of the animal. And then we talked about the idea of vegetation. Vegetation that can be elevated. And an easy thing that comes to mind is the etrog. It's a fruit. You can't use a pineapple. You know, people have asked me, well, if we can't go to Shul on Shavuot, can we read the Aseret HaDibrot on Erev Shavuot? Or can we make a minyan on Zoom? The answer is no. We say, well, can't the rabbis legislate something like that? No. No. And the simple answer is that in many, many towns in Europe, there were years in which there were no etrogim. Did they take lemons or apples? Take a peach because they didn't have an etrog? No, if you can't do the mitzvah, you didn't do the mitzvah. You can try really hard to do the mitzvah, but you can't create a false mitzvah. So the mitzvah of the four kinds necessarily requires a citron, an etrog. But we said if the etrog is taken from the first 3 years of crop of the tree, that's called arla. And as such, you would not be able to elevate it. So it's an etrog, you said, she'eino arla. And then we talked about ma'ot hagezel, money which is stolen. And a lot of people mistakenly think that it doesn't matter how they got the money. As long as they give tzedakah, it's just fine. As long as they do good things with that money, it doesn't matter. But they're wrong. It makes a world of difference. Because if the money didn't come to you in a kosher way, then you don't have the ability to elevate it. You can only denigrate it. And this will become the focus now of tonight's class. In the old print of the Tanya, the original Ram print of the Tanya from the turn of the century, we would be on page 92. That's the number on top. Mem Vav Amud Beis 92. It's still at the beginning of the 37th chapter, Perek Lamed Zayin. You can see Perek Lamed Zayin, and we're going to be looking at the footnote. That's the small print. You always have to read the fine print, you know. So we're going to look at the footnote here. The footnote which follows the words etrog she'eino orla. The etrog which is not orla. And the footprint begins in the bottom of page 92, and it moves on to the top of page Mem Zayin. So, come along with me. Let's do this little journey together. The inherent question is, so what if the etrog came from orla? So what? I'm not eating it. I'm not putting it in my tea. I'm not going to grind it up and mix it into my dough. I get it, it's not kosher. I understand that I cannot benefit from it, but this is not a personal benefit. I'm doing a mitzvah. Mitzvahs are not for benefit, as the Gemara says. Mitzvahs lav lehanot nitnu. Mitzvahs were not given to pleasure you. A mitzvah is not another form of self-expression. It is not another form of sensual pleasure, although you may enjoy doing a mitzvah, and that's great. But that's not what the mitzvah is for. The mitzvah is to be a sacred act of duty towards Hashem, which makes our world a better place. So if I use an esrog, so what if it was from Arlo? Who cares? And Al Tareb was very specific. He says, no, it has to be an esrog she'eino shel Arlo. So the Alter Rebbe explains in this footnote that as we have explained, as long as something is under what is known as the rubric of Klipat Noga, in Klipa, as we explained in the previous class and in many previous classes, is the idea of extraneous reality. God created a lot of amazing things that are filled with potential for goodness. But all that amazing stuff has not such amazing stuff mixed in. That's the result of Adam and Eve's eating of that fruit from the tree of knowledge. It became a mix of evil and good, and there is no evil without good, and there is no good without evil. Sometimes there's very little good, and it's very hard to extract that good. And sometimes there's very little evil, and it's fairly easy to weed out the evil or push it aside and focus on the good. And broadly speaking, we have learned that there are shalosh klipot hatmeot. There are 3 forms of absolutely unclean, impure, and dark klipa. This klipa cannot be modified. No matter what you do, the eggshell is still a shell. And it's disgusting. Nobody likes chewing on eggshells. So you got to throw it out. Nobody enjoys chewing on walnut shells. You got to break the walnut. You got to shatter. You got to crack the egg to get the egg out. You got to shatter the nut to get the walnut out. And nobody really eats the peel. That's a klipa. It's a peel. It gets discarded. It gets thrown out. It's there. It serves a purpose. And its ultimate destination is the garbage can. Then there's another kind of klipa. Then there's a skin which can be modified, can be eaten. Certain fish are cooked in the skin, and if it's cooked right by a really expert chef, it's delicious. I think they call it brazzini or something. It's wonderful. Otherwise, eating fins and scales, not fun. Shells which cannot become elevated, transformed, those shells are 3 forms of ritual impurity. And they're beyond the purview of our ability to elevate them from a Torah perspective. Klipas Noga, the shell of light, Noga has light, as we learned in our previous class. Light has to be found, identified, and extracted. So we learned that as long as something comes from Klipat Noga, which means it's not inherently holy until you make it so, but it's not inherently unholy because, or at least not intrinsically or irretrievably unholy, because while it may be inherently unholy now, you can change that. So as long as it's from Klipat Noga, it can be used to perform a mitzvah. So when one sees the different laws of Torah as disparate dimensions, there's a law of eating. I don't know why I have to eat kosher. That's what God said. He challenges me, eat only kosher. I said, oh God, the lobster smells so good. Don't do that. Okay, fine. I'll deny myself. I'll restrain myself. I'll pain myself. God, I hope they're serving something special in heaven. I hope it's going to make up for all the pleasure, all the bacon and eggs I missed out on. That's a very childish, juvenile, and wrong-headed way to look at mitzvahs. Instead, the Alter Rebbe, shining the light of the Baal Shem Tov and the teachings, or diffusing the teachings of the Arizal through the teaching of the Baal Shem Tov, explains that Hashem wants us to perfect the world, to elevate the world, to transform the world, to rarefy the world. And the only way that can be done is if we follow the will of Hashem. And the things that He said, don't eat, it's not because He wants to torture you. It's because those things can't be elevated. And the only way you elevate them is by pushing them aside. You get rid of them. You're pulling gas, oil out of the ground. You may have gone through a terrifically difficult process known as fracking, like they do in our country, in Canada. Or you simply stick a pipe in the ground in Arabia or Kuwait, and boom, oil comes out. But no matter how you got the oil out, it doesn't come out perfectly clean, and it's not ready to put into an automobile. And unless you get rid of lots and lots of toxins, a lot of silt, a lot of bad stuff, your engine will be clogged and 10 miles flat. It'll actually kill your motor vehicle. Now, trucks, like goats who can eat anything, they have a much rougher engine. They can handle that kind of garbage. Less is wasted, less is burnt off, less is destroyed. Diesel is cheaper. You drive a nice car, you spent a lot of money on it. Yeah, you may not want to put 87. You may want to go for 91 or 92. At least 89. Why? Because that's a more refined form of petrol, more refined form of gasoline. Why does it cost more? Simple, because the chaff is not there. There's less of it, and it takes more effort to produce it. So as long as we're talking about something which is a form of gasoline, you can put it into your car and you can go. They say, don't put that in your car. Why not? Because you want to torture me? I want to pay for diesel. Because it's going to destroy your car, because you won't be able to power your motor vehicle with something that rough. Don't do sin, because if you behave in a sinful way, you cause the world to become a darker, uglier place. You block out the light of Hashem. Every Avera we do necessarily blocks the light of Hashem from this world. Like a scary thought, but these are the facts. Every mitzvah we do makes the mist a little less dense. It allows for a little bit more light to penetrate, even if we don't see it. But it's the fact. And we believe it to be true. And when Mashiach will come, we will appreciate, we will see it. Now, because of this, the klaf, the parchment for the tefillin, cannot be made of something non-kosher, because the non-kosher animal doesn't have the possibility of being elevated. You cannot work with that klipa. The only way to work with that klipa is to shatter it. It can't be made into a mezuzah. It can't become a Sefer Torah. It can't become what we refer to in the vernacular as chefza shel kedusha, as an artifact of holiness. And the same thing is true with the etrog, which grew in the first three crops, the etrog of Arla. That etrog, that citron, cannot be used to perform a mitzvah. And because it can't be used to perform a mitzvah, you cannot make this world a brighter place when you hold it. The mitzvah doesn't work. And the Alter Rebbe says that's because Sheha'orla, because the first three crops, he mishalosh klipot hatmeot. That comes from what we call the three unholy grades of impurity, the three dimensions of black darkness that cannot be illuminated. It's totally off that black hole. Light will not penetrate there. It swallows all light. And interestingly, in the Sefer HaPardos it says that the 3 years of Arla correspond to the 3 klipot, all of which cannot be elevated. She'ein lahem aliyah le'olam. You can never elevate them. So it's not just during the first 3 years, because if I take fruits from those first 3 years and I cure them, and now it's the 4th, 5th, or 6th year after they were harvested, they're still prohibited. You can't eat it. Nothing you do will make it permissible per se. From a Torah perspective, it can't happen. From the rhyme and reason of Torah, Torah legislates this out of the picture. It's not included in the guise and the vision of a perfected godly world. As it says in Eitz Chaim, and here the Alter Rebbe references the writings of Lurianic Kabbalah. Now, of course, you may ask me a simple question. Should you happen to look in Eitz Chaim, you will notice that in Eitz Chaim he does not only talk about the etrog, or that which comes from Arla, but he also mentions that animals which are not kosher are from the same dark energy that cannot be elevated. So why doesn't the Alter Rebbe mention that? The answer is very simple. Because when it comes to the animal that's not kosher, that's a given. But the fruit is not so simple. Why not? Well, it goes something like this. The non-kosher animal, say a horse, say a pig, say a dromedary, camel, makes no difference. It comes from the womb of a camel, or a horse, or a pig. And so, as the Gemara says, hayotze min hatameh, that which comes from a non-pure source, tameh is not pure. Simple as that. It comes from a non-pure source, it is non-pure. Now, the fruits come from where? They come from a tree. Is the tree shalosh klipot hatmeot? Is the tree, the source where the fruit grew from, is that defined as something which is dark matter that can't be elevated? The answer is, you can't say that. Because in the 4th year, the crops are considered to be especially holy. And we bring those crops to the holy city of Yerushalayim, and they become the vehicle or the platform through which we praise Hashem. It's called Kodesh Ilulin. They're sacred. These are special fruit that are given a unique blessing and provide us with a very special platform which we wouldn't have otherwise. And then all the years subsequent, the fruits are 100% fine. So if the fruits are klipat noga, or shell of light, depends what you do with them, then it must be that they're coming from a tree which is klipat noga. And this presents us with an enormous paradox. If the tree is actually klipat noga, if the tree is powered by the extraneous reality, because everything other than inherent holiness is necessarily from the extraneous reality of the world, but that extraneous reality was meant to be modified. Materiality that's modifiable. So if that materiality is modifiable, what happened to its fruit? How did the Orla end up being Shalosh Klipas Atmeas? This is why the Alter Rebbe presumably has to quote the Eitz Chaim, because a person might argue, no, that doesn't work like that. Those fruits are really Klipat Noga. So why can't I eat it? Oh, the Torah says you can't eat it. It's not there's something wrong with the fruit, something wrong with you. You don't do that. That behavior is bad. And this leads us into a very interesting conversation, a very interesting discussion about the nature of mitzvot. And I want to introduce to you some terminology. And I'm going to tell you something interesting. The terminology I will use now, broadly speaking, is not typically employed in the mystical syntax. It's lifted straight out of what we would call exoteric Torah teaching. In fact, the famed Reb Chaim of Brisk, who pioneered his whole new definition of things, definition of items, by virtue and definition of responsibilities, and gave us a very unique way to study Torah and appreciate Torah and understand Torah, not mystical dimensions of Torah, exoteric dimensions of Torah. Reb Chaim Brisker did not appreciate the subtleties of spiritual pursuit. That wasn't his thing. In fact, the Rebbe's father, Rav Levi Yitzchak, Nishmas Eden, he went to get smicha from Reb Chaim Brisker. And Reb Chaim Brisker, who was amazed, very impressed with the Rebbe's father. He was a brilliant Torah scholar. And at some point he said to him, such a good mind, he said, such an incredible brain. What are you studying Hasidus for? He said, what are you studying mystical stuff for? He's one of the greatest Kabbalists of the 20th century. So what are you studying that for? You should focus only on the exoteric. This was his thing. This was his focus. His focus was the exoteric area of Torah. So the exoteric areas of Torah, we can define obligation of a mitzvah in the terms of gavra or chefza. Gavra is Aramaic and it means the person. Chefza is Aramaic and Hebrew and it means the object. So in other words, is it behavior that we focus on or is it the practical reality, the impact? Does God want the mitzvah to be performed, the chayfetz? Is it the object of the mitzvah, or what God is looking for is the gavra, the toil of the effort and expended by the individual? Is it the behavioral commitment that's most valued by God? And there are some mitzvahs that we look at one way and some mitzvahs that we look at another way. I will share with you something very interesting. Although the Rebbe taught that this was not the shita, not the approach of the Alter Rebbe, there is a very well-founded school of Torah thought that maintains that biblical mitzvahs deal with objective realities. Rabbinic mitzvahs are legislation about behavior. So biblical mitzvahs are chefza, and rabbinic mitzvahs are gavra. The Bible, the Torah, talks about the object of a mitzvah being performed. The rabbis did not sanctify or hallow an object. The rabbis talk to you. They give you a responsibility. And if the gavra, if the person is not capable of understanding, then there will be no issue. I'll give you a simple example. Can you feed a baby non-kosher food? The answer would be no. We don't do that. But the baby doesn't know what they're doing. Yeah, we believe that giving a baby non-kosher food could actually damage the baby spiritually. And we don't feed a baby ever non-kosher food. But can you feed a baby a bottle of milk after they had a meat dinner? The halacha today is virtually all observant Jews, or I should say most observant Jews, with a very small exception, will wait 6 hours after consuming meat before going on to consume dairy. Can you give a baby a bottle to put them to bed after they've had a dinner of meat? The answer is yes. Why? Because waiting 6 hours is not speaking about an objective reality. When you talk about a particular food, you say, that food is not kosher. When you talk about waiting 6 hours, you're talking about a behavior. The food is kosher, the milk is kosher, the meat is kosher. I can't eat that milk when I've eaten this meat until I wait a certain amount of time. So that would certainly refer to the person, to the behavior, not to the object. So one might think that when it comes to Orla, this is the Torah speaking towards behavior. And towards behavior, the Torah addresses the person and says, you shouldn't eat this fruit. The fruit's not bad, you shouldn't eat it. One might argue that. And one might argue it well. And the proof would be, from a mystical perspective even, that since the fourth year's fruits are sacred, and since the subsequent years, subsequent crops in which the tree will produce fruit for years on end is going to be kosher, obviously the tree is kosher, obviously the tree is from klipat noga, from the shell of light. So if it's from the shell of light, surely the orla, surely the crops of the first 3 years must also be coming from that source. The truth is that that's a very strong argument. How do we know it isn't so? Alter Rebbe made this very big statement. Orla, he said, etrog se'enoi shel orla. The answer is right here. The answer is because the Eitz Chaim says so. And if the Arizal said so, it is so. That's our source. And that's why here he quotes the Eitz Chaim. It's self-understood that a non-kosher animal comes from the shalot klipot hatmeot. It's not self-understood that the fruit is in the same fashion. In other words, what are we saying here? The inner reason, the reason behind the halachic or technical or legal perspective, is that the etrog, which is from orla, it may not be used for a mitzvah because the content, the meaning, the mission, the purpose, the definition of a mitzvah is modifying materiality, making this world godly, making it less dense, allowing the light through. It's rarefication. And that rarefication can't take place with all materiality. So since we can't use the etrog, the reason must be because the etrog is from shalosh klipas atmeis. And clearly, when something is from klipat noga, then it's available. Then it can be modified. Now, this leaves us, of course, with a very big question. And the big question is, okay, how does that actually work? If ultimately the tree is klipat noga, so if the tree is klipat noga, how is it possible that the fruit of the tree is from the 3 grades of non-retrievable impurity? Lucky for us, the Rebbe spoke about this at length in the weeks that followed Pesach in 1976. And much of that was later redacted and edited by the Rebbe himself, and it's found in Lakut Sichos in Chelik Chav Beis in volume 22 of the Rebbe's collected talks, edited talks. The Rebbe asked this very question. He says, the tree itself is permissible. The fruits come from a tree that's permissible. When I use the word permissible, I'm talking about klipat noga, shell of light, materiality that is malleable, that can be modified. Well, 1 second. If the fruits are coming from a tree that's permissible, that is powered by, if you will, the shell of light kind of energy, klipat noga energy, well then, if it's permissible, how could something permissible produce something which is not permissible? Doesn't make sense. And we know that to be the case because, as I mentioned earlier, after 3 years, the fruits are 100% permissible. Just please make a bracha and give the appropriate tithes if it's in Israel. So in that case, it should be very difficult for us to argue that these perot are actually shalosh klipas hatmeot, the dimensions of impurity, of extraneous reality that can't be brought home. But the fact is, the Alter Rebbe says, quoting the Eitz Chaim, that it is so. So the Rebbe said that if you look at the verbiage that the Alter Rebbe employs in Tanya, this is not the first time we've come across this. In the end of the 6th chapter of Tanya, there's also discussion. So the Alter Rebbe, when he speaks in the end of the 6th chapter of Tanya, when he talks about Orla, which is the first 3 crops, or Kalai HaKerem, which are permissible produce, but it ended up growing together. So when the vineyard grows together with the wheat, both become ritually defiled. Both become prohibited. So the Alter Rebbe uses the word kiyum v'chayus. He says their reality, they are sustained by the three klipas hatmeis. But when he speaks about animals that are ritually impure, he says kiyum gufam. The bodily, the corporeality is sustained by. So the difference between talking about sustained corporeality or sustained vitality. Kiyum v'chiyus means sustained vitality. Their sustenance, the vitality is powered by shalosh klipas hatmeis. When he speaks about non-kosher animals, he says their corporeality is powered by shalosh klipas hatmeis. What's the difference? Listen carefully. When God creates something, so the thing he created, that thing he created, is essentially continuously recreated. It's not born again every moment. It's continuously recreated. God continues to give it life. Would God stop giving it life for a moment, it would cease to be. But God is continuously giving it life. When we speak about crops, crops renew each year. The tree becomes the platform through which the sustenance, the vitality, the sap, if you will, is delivered. So the same tree can produce marvelous fruit one year and not such good fruit a different year. Same tree. It could be a variety of factors. Sometimes we may not even be able to figure out why there was a good crop or a bad crop. In other words, the crops are annual things. And so the Rebbe said, when we talk about the corporeality of the donkey, the horse, the pig, we say its corporeality, its body is powered by shalosh klipas hatmeis. You can't make a Sefer Torah. You can't put it in your cholent. You can't. The tree is an envelope. The envelope of the tree itself is klipat noga. However, through those veins of the tree, there is vitality. And in the first 3 years, the vitality that courses through the roots and into the veins and ultimately through the branches, into the buds, blossoms, and fruit. In the first 3 years is not kosher, and subsequently is kosher. In other words, we draw a difference between the nature of corporeality or a temporary form of sustenance. So the non-kosher animal is non-kosher. The tree is kosher, but through the tree is passing energy, which is not kosher. The fruits, shalosh klipat hatmeot. Because that which passes through, this vitality passing through the tree during the course of those 3 years is not kosher. And the tree remains merely it's a delivery pad. It's coming through the tree. And in the 4th year, a holy crop grows. And this is the way we can understand. That's why the fruit of the arla remains prohibited even after the 3 years pass. Because it was always not permissible. Not because kiyum gufam, not because of the sustenance of their materiality or corporeality, but because kiyum chiyusam, because of the sustenance of their vitality. Now all of this should really sharpen and hone our perspective, helping us appreciate and understand that when the Torah says don't do this, it can't be a good thing. And when the Torah says do this, it can be a good thing. And there are many people in the Western world who question this. And they see certain behaviors, and they say, what could be wrong with something like that? It's pure, it's innocent, it comes from a positive energy. We are not the arbiters of reality. Hashem is. We are not the barometers of truth. We have a jaded, selfish, and really very myopic way of looking at things. But the Torah tells us the truth about things. And the truth, my dear friends, is this. In every interaction in life, you can either modify materiality in a positive way, you can make it thinner, you can rarefy it, you can make it so that light can come through, or you can darken it. You can thicken its husk. That's our choice. Our actions make a world of difference. And this is the way we look at the idea, not only of the fruit that comes from Orla. Now the Alter Rebbe says something absolutely stupendous, mind-blowing. The next 7 words that the Alter Rebbe uses literally are transformative in the way we look not only at objects, but at behavior. The Alter Rebbe says, V'chein, and so too, kol mitzvah, every good deed, every holy act, every time we perform something which the Torah says will necessarily make our world a better place. But it's ba'a ba'avera. It comes through a sin. I'm studying Torah with great fervor. I had a Big Mac before. So I'm studying Torah. I got energy now. I ate non-kosher food. Guess what? You can't elevate it. If it's a mitzvah, haba ba'avera, it doesn't make the world a brighter place. If I stole money and gave tzedakah, I didn't make the world a better place. It's true the poor person may have a full belly, but it doesn't make the world a better place. Now you can ask me the question. The person studied Torah. If the pig enabled him to study Torah, the fact is the pig was elevated. So it would seem. The rich person wasn't giving tzedakah. This Robin Hood came, stole his money, gave it to the poor person. The poor person's happy now. He's satisfied, he's got food in his belly. The rich person doesn't even know that he was robbed. Life is great. I mean, after all, the money was used to feed somebody who was hungry. So the Rebbe addresses this in a letter, and he says that ultimately the notion of making the world a holier and a better place, the notion of transforming materiality on the level of spirit, this is on the level of ruchniut, not on what we can see, we can understand. This is a divine idea. It's not our idea. We can't be the ones to decide this. And because ultimately Hashem says that in this way you elevate the world, and in this way you don't. You may have studied Torah. You may have filled the poor person's belly. You may have put on tefillin. But you didn't make the world a brighter place. And that's what mitzvahs are supposed to do. They're supposed to transform the world in which we live. And if you don't transform the world in which we live, well, then you aren't doing a mitzvah. And if the mitzvah comes through an aveira, through a sin, through a violation of God's will, the world didn't become a better place. Simple as that. So I shook my lulav. I held fast to that etrog. All right, it came from the first 3 crops. Who cares? My dear friend, you wasted your time. You lit Shabbat candles, but you stole those candles. You did not make the world a brighter place. Oh, come on, Rabbi. I was there at the table. The Shabbat candles were so beautiful. They were glowing. Yeah, maybe so. But it didn't make the world a brighter place. And if you will say to me, it looks fine, I saw it myself, I will say to you, what we see in reality, nothing to do with one another. We see our delusional reality, the delusional reality that Hashem allows us to see, because there's so much obfuscation and concealment. But the truth will be seen when Mashiach comes. And the truth is that if you did the mitzvah, but you did it by virtue of the wages of sin, it doesn't work. It doesn't make our world a better place. So in other words, the concept of mitzvah haba ba'avera is not like, that's a no-no. God's saying, you're not going to please me by disobeying me. What, are you going to buy me off? Here you stole money, or you stole food, and they made a bracha on it, and you expect me to be impressed with that? It's not just that that's not a nice thing to do. It's not just that it angers God that you would have the gall, the insolence to violate His will, to fulfill His will. It's that it doesn't work. And therefore, instead of making the world a brighter place, that mitzvah actually makes the world a darker place. Imagine that. You did the mitzvah. You didn't do it according to halacha. It made the world darker. Chilling thought for many people in the Western world who tend to base things on their own emotions, their own feelings, or their own orbit of comfort. But the truth is not always comfortable. And the truth doesn't change, even if we don't like it. So essentially, when we find out what the halacha is, and the halacha says that something is either permissible or not, it's not like going to court to find out if this is legal or not. in the courts to say it's legal or not legal. It's not like to find out if it's moral or not. It's to find out if this works. Does it work? So I heard a terrible story yesterday about a woman who took her neighbor shopping because the poor lady, an older woman, couldn't get out of her condo. And a police officer fined her $1,000 for taking somebody else in the car who was supposed to be socially distanced. Now, what happens if that lady gets sick? Meaning the woman who was taking, that older woman, you would say suddenly, oh, they deserve that fine. What happens if nothing happens? I say, well, that's the legalities. In other words, when we deal with the legalities as they are per se, we're not looking at reality, we're looking at legality. A person might do something and say, this is the moral thing to do, this is the ethical thing to do. But ultimately, when we know what the halacha is, it's about the efficacious thing, that which makes a world of difference. I want to conclude with an excerpt of another edited talk from the Rebbe. This is from Chelik Tezayin, the 16th volume of Likutei Sichos. Very, very interesting. It's also kind of timely because here we are a few days before Shavuot, and the Rebbe speaks about the difference of mitzvot performed prior to the Torah's being given and subsequent to the Torah being given. And the Rebbe says that the primary difference between before and after could be couched in these terms of gavra or chefza, behavior or objective reality. The mitzvot performed prior to Matan Torah were expressions of behavioral excellence, beautifully done, but they didn't really change the world. Mitzvahs done after Matan Torah necessarily represent the idea that the world is being changed. The Rebbe says an amazing thing here in the footnotes. He says the same would even apply to the 7 Noachide laws. He says, because we know Rambam says the 7 Noachide laws change at the time of Matan Torah, and now the 7 Noachide laws which were applicable prior to Matan Torah are now applicable for all of humanity. Every single man and woman, regardless of race, creed, or color, is obligated in these same laws. It's not a Jewish thing, it's a universal thing. It's for every human being created in God's image. But they are obligated because we, the Jewish people, got the Torah at Mount Sinai, and we were commanded to teach it to everybody else. And the Rebbe maintains that even the 7 Noachide laws, there would have to be an impact in the world. It's not only behavioral. We tend to think of the 7 Noachide laws as behavioral. The Rebbe says here in the footnote that it is efficacious. Not in the same way as Torah and mitzvot are for Jewish people, but nonetheless. After the Torah was given, because these mitzvot are not done by virtue of my ability, but rather God's ability. God empowered us. And therefore, when we do the mitzvah, or when we chas v'shalom violate the mitzvah, we are necessarily making our world a brighter or a darker place. And the Rebbe actually alludes to this he notes this very footnote in Tanya. And he says, a mitzvah haba ba'avera, even money that comes from theft. Now, it is a little hard to wrap your head around this, because if the money comes from theft, the money itself isn't bad. It's just that my possession, my ownership of it wasn't right. So we would need to say that when money is owned by somebody, that there's a dimension of reality created through ownership. And that ownership is rotten. The dimension of reality called ownership, which Torah considers to be a reality, and if somebody steals, they'll be violating reality or violating this truth, that truism of belonging is actually either powered by Shalosh klipot tatmeot or klipat noga. My possessions, the things I own, are things that are available to me to make the world a better place. But if I own them through illegal means, I actually can't make the world a better place, no matter what I do with that money. It's a very, very sophisticated, I would say it's a very nuanced kind of idea. But ultimately, the Alter Rebbe takes this home entirely. Here, having fully illustrated how material can be modified and how material cannot be modified. And that, my dear friends, is the essence of a mitzvah. And so, in closing, we should do every mitzvah that comes our way, because every mitzvah that comes our way is literally a step in the direction of putting an end to the darkness. And every time we slip and trip, every time we don't find the courage and the strength and stamina to beat down the Yetzer Hara, and we give in, making our world a darker place. And the good news is that it's going to be just one mitzvah, hopefully performed by one of us very speedily and in our time, that'll weigh the scales down and be the one to catalyze the revelation of the truth that has been going on for thousands of years. At that moment of clarity, all the mitzvahs performed by Am Yisrael, especially during this exilic period of the last 1950 plus years, will suddenly become clear. And that one mitzvah will snap everything into sharp focus. And we will see how all of those mitzvahs built the perfect, beautiful garden, the dira le'yizbarech, the dwelling for Hashem, which will come in Mirza Hashem, as it was at Matan Torah for a brief moment. It will come in Mirza Hashem, please God, very soon, for posterity, ubimheira, ubiyamenu, amen.